locked you in a closet. I never beat you. I just slapped you over your face a bunch of times. Get over it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast, the Delta Gals podcast. Today, we have another amazing opportunity, an amazing interview, and just casual conversation. So I'll let Emily Fatmata go ahead and introduce our guest for today.
Today we have Karlos Dillard. I came across Karlos on TikTok and he has such an amazing story. And I reached out to him and we started talking. And he's like, yes, I'll come on. I was like, oh my gosh, that'd be so great. So we are so excited to have you here today, Karlos. And I just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for bringing me on and to share my lived experience. I think no matter how big or small podcasts are or platforms are, we reach people that we may not reach ourselves. So I definitely want to encourage you guys, the podcast world. I have a podcast of myself, excuse me, and it could be daunting. So I appreciate, Black women coming up and being like, we're here, we're going to reach out to people, like we're going to take risks. I've listened to a few episodes and they are amazing. I love what you guys are doing on TikTok, your content. So just thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experience on your platform. I really appreciate it. But if you guys don't know me, and my name is Karlos Dillard, I was a former foster youth. I experienced foster care in the state of Michigan. I was in about 37 different foster homes before I was ultimately adopted by Caucasian people. I spent majority of my life between 9 to 13 as the only Black person in my town, in my district, in my school, church, things like that. Unfortunately, my adoptive parents in the early 2000s just made a lot of bad decisions about my upbringing as far as conversion therapy, rebirthing therapies, troubled teen institutions. So it's kind of like they just checked off all the things that we now know 20 to 30 years later, like, that's not good. Like if you want people to attach to you, you're trying to have a child attached to you, maybe don't do that. But unfortunately that was done, and our adoption really just, after those intrusive therapies, it just really struggled. When I was 15 years old, my adoptive parents ended up abandoning me on the street. And instead of going to, so when I say on the street, what they really did was I went on a trip with my friends, Heather and her family in Daytona, and they moved. They moved their entire house. Like I left home on Thursday. I came home Sunday night and the house was empty. So like I say on the street, but I really want people to understand, like they just moved.
And they didn't tell you anything? Like they didn't call you, text you, think, oh, we have a son,
they left a letter on the door instructing me. It said it was all my stuff was on the street. So like my bed, my clothes, everything. I took what I could. I took some clothes and I ended up taking 2 of my scrapbooks, which is what I have. I actually have, like, they're right here. I'll show you. This is the only thing that has survived my childhood, is right here. Like I carried these things being like a homeless teenager. And these are not thin books, but I just knew that like this was all my life that I had. So I've always kept it near me. And they left the envelope saying like, hey, turn yourself into the CPS system. You can go back into foster care. Or you can emancipate yourself, either one. Emancipation wasn't possible because you need your parents' permission to emancipate.
I was gonna say you can't even do it without like whoever is the guardianship.
That wasn't an option. And after surviving foster care, I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going back to foster care. So I ended up staying with my friend Heather and her parents for like 6 months. I had to decide what I was going to do because at that moment I was only a sophomore in high school. So I had to decide, like, what am I going to do? I had two part-time jobs, one at Panera Bread, one at the Old Navy. But it still wasn't enough to like support myself individually. And I had to decide what I was going to do. And I dropped out of high school, got my GED. After I got my GED, I had more opportunities to, work full-time. Unfortunately, my friend Heather's mom was going through stage 4 cancer. Like, she was dying. She ended up dying like 6 months after I left their house. I felt like a burden. They never asked me to leave to this day. Like, they still check on me. My friend Heather, she had a son. He's my godson. Like, they're my family. But I just felt like I was a burden. Like, this family was going through so much. Her mom had cancer. She was 16. She was pregnant. Like, there was a lot going on. So
Mhm.
I kind of like lied to them. And I said, hey, I have another friend that I'm going to go live with, and it's all cool. And they didn't really push me too much. And they said, okay, Carlos, like if that's your decision. I didn't have no place to go.
Right. I mean, you were 15 and
You're
your
you're
family
the
who was supposed to
advisor.
take care of you just abandoned you. Of course, where were you supposed to go?
Yeah, so I ended up staying like couch to couch. I did have some friends. I had some
Uh-huh.
friends. My one friend had a pool house. Her name was Liz. She's still a friend to this day. She snuck me into her parents' pool house for like a month, where she would,
Oh,
because they had like a whole like pool house, like with a kitchen and a bed. And she's like, we don't use it. You can use it. Her
Yeah.
mom was a nurse, and when she found out what was happening, of course, she's a mandated reporter. So she's like, hold on. You're 16.
Yeah.
Like, when I turned 16, she's like, you're 16. You can't just be in my house. Like, and now as an adult, as a kid, I was just like, why can't I? But as an adult, I'm like, yeah, this is not safe.
Yeah.
Like, especially as a mandated reporter, like you have to report if a child is missing or not taken care of. So she said, Carlos, if you stay here, I'm going to have to report it.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, we know, I'll skedaddle. Unfortunately, I ended up being human trafficked by this dude who I thought was my
What?
boyfriend, and he wasn't. And I talk about this a lot because people think that human trafficking looks like a SVU scene, like when a
Yeah.
van comes in and skirts and like pulls. No, a lot
Mhm.
of it, a lot of people who are being human trafficked are coworkers of yours, people who go to school. I went to school,
Yeah.
I had a
yeah.
job, but then when you go home, there's this expectation to pay your way, right? And it started off, it's like, oh, you can stay here. Oh, you're cute. Oh, I'll date you. And then it was, oh, you have to do this
Mhm.
for me. And then you have to do this for my friend. And then you have to do this for my friend's
Mm.
friend. And then
Mm.
now you just have
Oh.
clients that you have to do literally to pay
And
your
how
way.
old's Carlos? I'm so sorry. I feel like there's so much. Like you don't know how many questions are going through my head right now. Probably about a million.
Wow.
But I just want to ask you at this point, how old were you?
16.
16.
Oh, so you were still
I was still a
young,
minor.
very, very young. Still, okay.
Mhm.
Wow.
I was 16 years old, and we can get into like my foster care story later, but I guess we kind of just like started there
Yeah.
at the adoption part. Um, I was 16 years old. I ended up in that situation for about like a year. And then I met a dude who worked at my job named Dwayne, who was also older, but he was really, really sweet. We ended up dating for years, which was also a little weird because he was like 24 and I was 17.
Mm.
But
Mm.
in Florida, it's like there's
Yeah.
a sunshine mother, what is it called? The Romeo and Juliet law. It was still inappropriate. Now, as an adult myself, I look back and I was like, that was kind of
Mhm.
also an inappropriate relationship. But he did get me out of that situation, right? He
Mhm.
did help me. What ended up happening was one of the clients, sorry, there's like a fly. It's fly season in Arizona. One of the clients ended up being an undercover sting operation, and I got arrested at 17 for pimping and pandering and solicitation. And I didn't know, like, that was my first time getting into like real legal trouble besides being like a teenager that stole like a pair of earrings from like belts,
Mhm.
but like real legal trouble. And at the time I was dating him, and that's what I tell people too. You can be human trafficked and still have a
Mhm.
whole partner or a whole boyfriend or girlfriend
Mm.
that they don't even know because you're so afraid. These people have your
Mhm.
IDs, especially if you're a minor. They have your IDs. They control your housing. They control your car. They'll buy you a car. They'll get you an apartment, but none of this is in your name, right? So, and they
Yeah.
remind you of this, like, right? None of this is in your name, and you are going out living your life, acting like everything's fine, but you're
Mhm.
literally being trafficked on the back end. And it took me years to even realize, like unpacking that with therapists and talking to other CSA survivors and human trafficking survivors. Like, Carlos, you weren't, because I was just like, oh, I was hustling. They're like, Carlos, you were not hustling. You, you
Mhm.
were
Yeah,
you
you
were
were a child that was being trafficked. Yeah.
yeah. And it took me forever, like, wow. They're like, would you have been there would you have done it if they would have said you can just say that? I was like, no, I didn't want to do it. They're like, yeah, and
Mm.
children can't
Yeah.
consent, right? And it took me forever to understand, like, children cannot consent to anything of
Mhm.
that sort.
No, no,
Um,
absolutely not.
Eventually, this new boyfriend that I met introduced me to, because I told him I had gotten arrested, and he said, I'll help bail you out. And then I said, great. And I said, I don't have anywhere to go though. Like, I
Mhm.
don't have anywhere to go after that. And he said, okay, you can stay with me for a little bit. And then I stayed with him for a little bit. And then he introduced me to who I call my life coach now, who's Perry.
Mhm.
He's like my step-in dad. He's a older Black man who taught me literally everything that I know about being a Black man today. And he's like, oh, no, you can definitely come live in my house. There's rules. The system did get involved with him because he too was like, this child is still 16, 17. He can't just stay in my home. So he reached out to the state. The state was like, oh, no, he can live there. They actually tried to get him to do foster care. And he said, no, he didn't want to be a foster parent. He didn't want to do guardianship. He just wanted
a lot of responsibility.
Well, that's what he was saying. He goes, I can teach this young man to become a man the way that I choose to. But if I become a foster parent or a guardianship parent, I'm now at the I have to follow y'all's rules. He didn't want to follow that rule. He wanted to be
protocols and regulations for
right.
Too
many regulations too. And then he goes, and then he told me, even as today when we speak, he goes, Karlos, if I were to become a foster parent, you knew the system too well, and you would be like, because I used to try that, like, oh, I'll just call the cops. He's like, on what? You don't have to be here. They already know you're here. You can leave. Like, he knew, like, if I had that power over him, I would use it because I had trauma. So he just never, but he was like, he can stay here as much as he wants. I'm just not going to be wrapped up in y'all's system to help this child. And fortunately, they allowed him to keep me until I was 18. And he taught me everything. I got finished with my GED. I got enrolled into college. He taught me how to interview for jobs, all of it. And I stayed with him until I was about 19. And then I got my own apartment. And then, that rest of the story is history, but that's kind of how it started with me being a homeless teenager was, the abandonment from my adoptive parents.
Wow. Karlos, you have gone through so much, and it looks like you're in mid-20s or something at this point.
Oh, thank you. No, girl, I'm 32.
Stop. 32. You have lived the life of like an 80-year-old. Like, I swear to God, that's like so much, and it's so different than a lot of people we've had on this podcast. You've gone through just so much trauma after trauma. People like putting the trust in people that really did not deserve your trust. You being taken advantage of. Like, you've gone through it all, and like to survive it, like you have, and come out on the other side, and like actually be a voice for change, a voice for positivity. That's incredible. That's so incredible, honestly.
I feel like I kind of owe it to people and for Children in Care Now because I have been through a lot. Foster care, adoption, rebirthing. We can even touch on rebirthing.
Yeah, we need to go back on all of that.
Yeah, we're going to rewind. We're definitely
I want to rewind.
Trust me.
But I'll rewind, but I want to just say I kind of owe it to people because if I know the percentages of adoptees and foster youth that don't make it. There is a sense of, nature versus nurture. And I come from a very strong family. I researched my family back into the early 1600s, and there was a lot of adversity within my ancestors. And I truly believe that it's in my blood to teach. One of my great grandmothers was one of the first teachers post-slavery to educate Black children how to speak. My grandfather was one of the first Black men to own land in Louisiana. So there have been very, very instrumental people in my direct lineage. And I tell people all the time, they say like, Karlos, how did you do it? I was like, I don't know. Like it comes from within.
Yeah. I mean, it all makes sense now because when I was watching your videos and just listening to you talk right now, like there's so much strength and power that emanates from you. Like in your videos, and I was on your TikTok page just watching, and I'm like, I could just watch you all day. It all makes sense now. It's in your blood. It's in your DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. So I was born in Detroit, Michigan, to a young mother. I was the youngest of four. My mother was also a survivor of the foster care system herself. So that's another thing that you can see in my story are these statistics that we see, young women who go into foster care usually have a 75% chance of becoming mothers at the age of 19. Boom, that happened to her. She had 4 children before the age of 22. For the majority of my childhood, growing up until I was about 6, to me, it was normal. It's like hood life, but like my mom was there, my dad was there, they had a little hood, but like we had all the things. Like my mom loved Rent a Center. Like we always had nice things. Things didn't start getting rocky until my father went away. I distinctly remember this. I was like 3 or 4. And I remember my father being arrested for marijuana use or like selling.
Mm.
And he went away for a long time. And my mom just started dating all of these dudes. She didn't became an instant single mother because she really wasn't on welfare before then because, you know, he was hood rich. He was hood rich. So like he was taking care of him. And I'm the only child from my dad. So he was taking care of me plus my siblings, and, you know, really just like stepping up to the plate, being a father. After he went away, my mother is now a single mother of 4 children. Her boyfriend, her longtime boyfriend, is now in jail. She doesn't have a GED. She's out of foster care system herself. So what did she turn to? Like what most people do? I'll just pick up where he left off. And just like the Black woman that she was, she did great. She was one of the largest selling producers of narcotics. She did what Black women do, but I was like, that wasn't the best thing to do it to. You know, but she did, like, she ran numbers. She got really deep into the lifestyle. Where, you know, there were drive-bys and people coming to like rob her for her supply and things like that. And of course, that wasn't a safe environment for her children.
Right.
And to not make an excuse for her, because I've talked to her before her passing about this, you know, that wasn't an excuse. But now as an adult, I can understand, like, you have the tools that you have and you use what you have, you know. I would probably now, this is why I suggest to my clients other alternatives. We have resources, girl. If we need to do a GoFundMe, we can do something. You ain't got to be out there in the streets selling, like, right? Unfortunately, due to her quote unquote job, she left a lot. So she was in Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Ohio, you know, hustling. And that left my 13-year-old sister at home with us 4 boys, or 3 boys who were younger. And, you know, the lights would get cut off. We would run out of food. She would always come back and fix this stuff when she came back, but that's just not appropriate to leave children from 13 to
long
6.
periods of time. Yeah, no.
Yeah, for very long periods of time, right? And we got removed from CPS when I was 7. I wrote about it in my memoir, Wards of the State of Memoir Foster Care, about that day. They just like bull rushed into our house after my brother and I went to school and told them we didn't have food for the summer, and we were concerned. Foster care then started. I remember thinking like foster care was going to be like cool. I was like, oh, cool. Like I have parents. Like, no, nothing. Like the first home was great, but that was a temporary home. Those homes are supposed to be like the kind of transition. You know, it's very temporary. Most people who do temporary foster care are really good people because they know they ain't got to deal with these kids for a whole lot of time, right?
Yeah.
After that, I won't go into much detail because y'all can go read the book. But after that, you know, I bounced from home to home to home. I was with my sister for a few homes. I ended up being separated from my sister. My brothers we all ended up being separated, all into different homes. About my 2nd year in foster care, I was at like number 36, 35 or 36. By that time, I had suffered, you know, everything. CSA, child abuse, mental, sexual, emotional, physical, like anything and everything from different foster parents. And these are white, Black, Asian, Latino. These are all different types of people. And
let me ask you this, Karlos. Sorry, because I want people to like like hear a little bit about like your experience, what you were going through as all of this stuff was happening. Because you know, when you're young, like a lot of things happen to you. You don't have control over it, especially being in your position where you didn't have anyone to protect you. Like, what were you experiencing, like internally? Like, what was going through your head during these points? Like, what was your personality like? Were you like a fighter, or were you just like, you know, like, did you feel like?
I was a fighter. I was that kid because I also grew up in the inner city of Detroit and Muskegon Heights. So like I was that kid. Like I was the youngest of 4 hood kids.
Okay,
so
yeah,
I was the young one that had to get. I was riding mountain bikes at like 4 years old. And my mother always had this thing. My birth mother always had this thing is that if one of us fight, we all fight. So I've been fighting with my siblings, like in like big boy teenager fights since I was. My brother now, he will tell you, he was like, when we got in fights, people didn't want to fight Karlos because I don't fight fair. I'm that kid. I'll just go grab a knife. Listen, like I'm just not gonna do it. So as I was going through this, I would fight back. And I talked about that in my book about fighting back and trying to have
Mhm.
that voice as a child. And I
Mhm.
quickly learned that the more you fight, oh babe, they finna, excuse my French, they finna fuck you up
They
because
are.
you now are mentally insane. So they're wrapping you up in
Mhm.
straight jackets. They're putting
Mhm.
you in soft rooms.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
spent like a couple months in a mental institution at 7 years old with adults.
Yeah.
And it's so weird to be an aged child because I had the mindset because of trauma of
Mhm.
probably like a 13 or 14-year-old when I was 7. So I'm observing like, oh, these people are nuts. Like
Mhm.
they're nuts. Like these people really need to be here. And I even told myself, I was like, I don't need to be here. And there was this one lady at this mental institution. She was really close to me. Her name was Miss Pam. And I was like, Miss Pam, like, how do I get out of here? And she's like, Carlos, you have to know that you're not crazy. And she was like, I know you're not crazy. And she has like, you have to believe in that in yourself. So at 7 years old, I started hiding my medication because they put you on Adderall, Respirol, Wellbutrin, Ritalin. I was on a cocktail. So I
Carlos,
Oh
was at
gosh, that's
7
a
years
whole
old. I
list.
was 70 years old. And I realized I was like, they're making me crazy through
yeah,
these.
Carlos, I can relate with you because I actually not a lot of people know this, but when I was I think 14, I ended up going to mental institute as well. And you're definitely right. The people that you're with, it just makes you really, really question a lot of things. Like, why am I here? Like, I felt like the most sane person in the whole world, just compared to the people that you're with.
Mhm.
And but they try to like box you into the same group. So I get it. Like,
And I was a little kid being like, I don't need. So I was like, okay, how do I get out of here? Act not crazy.
Mhm.
So I started not taking my meds to them that I was taking them, but I was hiding them under my tongue and I was flushing them. 3 weeks after I started doing that, they're like, oh, his behavior is just transferred. It's just so amazing. Because I also was like, hey, like to me, it was a survival tactic because I learned that in foster
Mhm.
care too. The more that you say you don't want to be somewhere, that's where they're gonna keep you.
Mm.
The more you're
that's
like, oh no, this is cool. What are we doing
Yeah.
today? Like, what's on the schedule? And they're like, oh, he's getting too comfortable here. Like, let's transition him out. So that's literally what they did. They transitioned me out back into my last foster home. At that moment, at that point, they put me on Wednesday's Child, which is a news advertisement in Michigan where they highlight kids who need homes. My mom had lost parental custody. TPR was permanent at that point.
Mhm.
So they put me on this news station. And they did this whole interview, like, so what are your favorite things? What do you like? And like, they made me look great. I remember seeing the episode. I was like, I look like a really nice kid. And I was like, are they gonna say anything about like the behavior issue? Even as a kid, I was just like, I ain't that nice, but y'all made it look real nice. My adoptive parents saw that
Mhm.
interview and then inquired with the agency, and then that's how that process started.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's how I went from foster care
Mhm.
through my transition to be adopted, and then ended up being adopted. I got adopted.
Wait,
At,
I want to hear, I'm sorry, I keep cutting you
no,
because
you're fine.
I
You're
really
fine.
have a lot of questions and I feel like if I don't cut you, we will hear your whole life story. So my question I was wondering, because a lot of times when we talk about how adoption, foster, a lot of times it can be very romanticized because it's like you're being put into a house with people taking care
Mhm.
of you, providing for you, but they don't know the type of trauma that these kids are enduring, the type of abuse sometimes, right? And so they don't have a voice that's like empowered and helping them and supporting them, like put them in a better position. So when you were going through like the trauma from house, because you mentioned you were with Asian family, Black family, white family, you name it, and you're going through all this type of abuse, like who would you go to like talk about some of the stuff? Did you have anyone in your corner? And like when you went to like CPS or whatever, like
My
like
sister.
did they believe you with all of the allegations?
So no adults would really believe me. It
Mhm.
was my sister at that time. My sister was like 16, 15. She was a teenager, and we were still doing visitations. And I would tell
Mhm.
her, she was actually, I was too afraid to tell the adults. And my sister I would go to a visitation and I would say, like, hey, they just abused me or they just SA'd me. And
Mhm.
she would stand up and she's like, I'm not leaving my brother until y'all get him out this house. And she did that a
Mhm.
couple times where she was the one that stood up and told our caseworker, like, hey, this is happening to Carlos. He
Mhm.
needs to be placed in another home. And she would just raise hell. she would raise hell until they did something about it. So she was really my go-to person. Unfortunately, my adoptive mother, because I was supposed to have a semi-open adoption with my siblings, not with my parents, but with my siblings, because we were older. Like you should not disconnect children that grew up together. My adoptive mother realized that my sister would be quote unquote a problem. So about 6 months after my adoption was finalized, she cut off all contact with them. And then I really didn't have nobody.
All your siblings, just the sister.
All of them. All of them.
Wow.
So what was your first, like, what was your experience with your adoptive family like when you first like met them? Because you had already gone through all this trauma. I'm sure it's really hard for you to trust people in the first place. Like, what was your first like couple years together? What was that dynamic like?
Yeah, so a lot of people may not understand when you get adopted from foster care, there's a transition period. It's usually 6 to 12 months where you go on visitations, like usually weekend visitations. So honestly, my first year of being adopted or going through that process was amazing. Like when I first met them, they brought over these scrapbooks. That's why I have scrapbooks. My mom was really into scrapbooking, my adoptive mother. And like she showed me like they went to Disney and Vegas and like traveled. And like it was like, I was like, wow, like I was like, I hit the jackpot. Like, cause you know, we fantasize because what we see on television, right? So I was like, I really got like that, like white picket fence. Like we literally had a white picket fence, like this white house. And I was like, wow, like I really did hit the jackpot. So the first year was fantastic. We did just that. We went on all different types of vacations, Wisconsin, Vegas. But now as an adult who does this work, I now understand that is called the honeymoon period. Even with everything for the first year is going to be great. It's going to be grandiose, right?
And did your adoptive parents have any other kids, or were you?
So it's a little complicated.
Okay.
So I want to break it down. My adoptive father had a son with his first wife. My adoptive mother is his second wife. So my father had a son, and he had 50-50 custody. So my adoptive brother came every other weekend and then through the summer. So my adoptive mother, before me, when they started this process of adoption, had no children. At that point, she had maybe like 6 or 7 miscarriages. During my adoption process, she ended up getting pregnant. Well, not even my adoption process. During the process of her looking for children, like when they started, like we want to adopt a child, she ended up getting pregnant. When I met her, she was just at the end of like when they told me about them, she was just at the end of her pregnancy and it was just about to have her baby. When the first initial meeting happened, I think her son was like 2 months old. So when we met each other, she was then a mother. And this is where I think, as a child welfare advocate, if I was in this position, if I was working my case, that's the moment I would have really looked, because her whole thing was being a mother, and she got that with her own child. She never wanted to adopt. The only reason she wanted to adopt is because she was a mother. So to me, that would have been a red flag. Like, okay, do you still want to adopt? You got your own baby now. Like, are you these children the same? I think that definitely should have been alerted. But no, she had technically one child when my adoption started, but it was very much in a timeline of she was already starting the adoption process. I think that maybe she felt guilty of starting it and then being like, oh, we don't want him anymore. It would have hurt me as a child, but as an adult, I'm like, that would have been so valid, and you would have saved me so much heartache. Like you really would have saved me so much heartache if you would have just been real with yourself when the process started.
I think sometimes, you know, a lot of people who adopt, because they're adopting from like a lot of times they have a savior complex, right? Or they want to do good for the earth or for maybe religious reasons, right? It's hard for them. They have a lot of guilt with the idea of having to give up something that they had to, like, I guess, representation that they're putting out of who they are, right? So you have gone to the world and said, hey, I'm a good person, I want to adopt, look at the kids in foster care or Africa, they're starving, I want to save them. And then now it's like, I don't even want them anymore, I'm just going to give them away. To them, it's like, there's a lot of guilt around that, a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, because now who you are is being seen and shown. The reason that you adopted
your true self
is your true self is coming out. You didn't really want to adopt because of the, like, genuine reasons. You had selfish intentions, which, I mean, she wanted a child. Like, that's a valid reason to adopt. You know what I mean?
Definitely not. But I get what you're saying.
You know what I'm
No, I don't believe infertility is not a reason to adopt. Infertility is a
Mm,
medical issue, and adoptees are not medical devices. We're human beings.
mm,
If you have a
saying?
medical issue, go to the
mhm,
doctor, get that figured
mhm,
out. Some people
So she had infertility. I get that. I'm saying,
mhm.
like, well, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, if you want to adopt, right? Because
do it
kids,
to adopt to help the child. Do it
Yeah,
to
exactly.
I'm adopting to
That's
help
what I
a
always
child.
say on this channel. Like when it comes to white saviorism, it's like you cannot have any type of selfishness in you when it comes to adoption. It
Mhm,
has to be 110% about the child. Because if it's not about the child, that you're gonna see, like the things that you've experienced, the things that I've experienced, and how I've experienced when it comes to white saviorism, you're gonna hurt your child in some way, and your child has no say in any of this process, and you are taking them in your own selfish way, and you're going to hurt them
And the
internally.
well,
reason why,
guys, what I'm saying is, I don't think it's so black and white. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
I don't think it's you just want to adopt just to have a child, and
Yeah.
you know, if the child is opposite of what you want to raise them, then you just throw them away. That's not what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
saying there's people who have dual intentions where you want a
Mhm.
child, you can't have a child, or maybe you want an additional child, and you also want to do good, right? However, I think when you're coming from that perspective, there's a lot of education that needs to occur. And I think that's where a lot of people bypass is the education, learning about their biases and where the areas where they're ignorant or they don't know. A lot of people don't
Mhm.
want to go through those steps. You know what I'm saying? And so I think if you have a little bit of, I want a child, I can't have a child, and you want to do good and you're willing to educate yourself, put yourself in uncomfortable places and see outside of yourself, a lot of people cannot do that. But I think if you have that mix, it can work out. I genuinely feel that way.
I appreciate and I heard you. If you want
Mhm.
a child, go lay on your back and have your own.
Mhm,
Children are not something to be wanted.
mhm,
Children are human beings. If you truly want to help, and that's my issue. And I heard exactly what you mean because you said with education, and that's why I'm with you on that part, right?
mhm,
Say I have infertility, I want a child.
Mhm.
You need to go educate yourself, like you just said, right? Mentally, mental health. But even for birth parents, let's take adoption out of this.
mhm.
Mhm.
Wanting a child doesn't mean that you're going to be a good parent. It takes
Exactly.
education. So, like, even if you take adoption out of it, even birth
Mhm.
parents, you should not have a child just because you want one,
Mhm.
right? Like you should do, like you said, some education. Make sure
Yeah.
you got the resources. Make sure you're
Yeah.
prepared. Because
Yeah.
I just think the verbiage is "I want a child" is so harmful for not only but for all children. Because
Mhm.
children should not be some. I want a Louis Vuitton bag. I
Mhm.
want, I want a new car. I want
Listen,
to
we
buy
know
a
you
house.
moved
Those
on.
are things that we can want and we could buy
Yeah.
without doing any. And even on those things, and this is the gag, it's more effort to buy a home than it
Mhm.
is to buy a child. There
Mhm,
are more loopholes and regulations on buying a home than buying a child.
Mhm.
So my want for a home is more valid than my want for a child because I have to what? Do research. I got to be
Mhm.
qualified. They're doing
Mhm.
background checks,
Mhm.
financial checks, credit score. They're not doing any of that for
mhm.
people who quote unquote want
That's
children.
true. You just have to
That's
have the
so
money.
true.
You have to have the money. You have to go to a
Yeah.
couple of classes, and that's it. But I will say this though, there are a lot of kids who do not have parents. There are a lot of kids who are
Mhm.
on the streets. There are a lot of kids who are starving. And I don't think any child should have to raise themselves up. I genuinely do not believe that.
Mhm.
And
No.
and just seeing that in America now, when you take Africa, it's escalated the amount of kids who are orphans and all of that. Now, I'm not saying for anybody to adopt, absolutely not at all whatsoever. I think there needs to be more regulations and more
Mhm.
protocols when it comes to adoption. A
Mhm.
1000%, because we've had guest after guest after guest, a
Mhm.
lot of trauma, a lot of
Mhm.
sexual abuse. The first guest we had on here, she started off in her foster. The first home she went to was a foster care, it wasn't adoption, right? And
Mhm.
in that home, she was the whole time getting raped and molested by the father. You know what I'm
And
saying?
that
And
was
then,
actually that was her family. That was her adoption family.
oh, that was her first. Yeah, that was her
Her
adoption
yeah.
family. And
Well,
she
that
was,
happens. Well,
and
children outside of their home are 8 times more likely to be SA'd by non-relatives. So, like, we
Wow, I
can
did
see
not
it
know
that.
that.
wait, you said, wait, what did you say?
Children outside of their home, so in external care, that's foster care, guardianship,
Mhm,
kinship, and it includes all of it. In adoption, you're 8 times more likely to be
mhm,
physically abused or SA'd,
mhm,
because a lot of the time, if you just look at statistics, they do it for a couple reasons. One, a lot of adoptive parents don't see you as their own, so it's not
mhm,
incest,
And do
right?
whatever. Yeah.
And two, if something does happen and you get pregnant, then they just have another baby that they can adopt. And we see that often a lot in a lot of my
It is
interviews.
mhm,
disturbing. Oh my
Those
God.
who are raped by their adoptive father, and then they have to have the baby, and the adoptive parents adopt the baby.
That
That
happened.
story happens so many times. But I want to circle back on something that you said, Hawa. You said that there are children on the street that need homes, and I absolutely agree with you.
mhm,
Adoption does not certify children homes. Adoptions in the United States are just legal agreements. We have
mhm,
alternatives. I'm so for external child care. I'm a kinship parent myself, so there's someone in my family. My niece needed, another home for the
mhm,
moment, and we opened up our home. We don't have to
mhm,
adopt her to give her that home. I think a lot of
mhm,
people going back to ownership. They want to
mhm,
own children. They want to change that birth certificate because, like you said, they want to
mhm,
feel like they are a parent because, like you said, I wanted to
mhm,
be a parent instead of
mhm,
saying I wanted to help a child. We can
mhm.
help children get external child care. Let me put in perspective for you because instead of if you've noticed on my platform, I'm not a feelings person. I talk about feelings, but I like numbers because numbers don't lie. Numbers, because people lie. People lie to you. People's emotions, they're valid, but they be lying sometimes, right? So let's look at the numbers. We have 400,000 children in foster care currently in the United States. We have 115,000 of these children eligible for adoption. They usually
Mhm,
are aging from the age 6 to 9 or 6 to 17, right?
mhm,
Usually in that middle age, like 6 to 10. That's how a majority of the children who are available for adoption. On the private side of adoption, we don't know how many adoptions are being done because they're private. So we know that there's a lot because it's a $25 billion industry. But we
mhm,
do know that per baby that is born, there are 8,000 couples waiting for each baby. So there are more parents wanting infants, right? And
mhm,
there's a lot of them, hundreds of thousands of them, because we know we have hundreds of thousands of adoptions in the United States, especially private adoptions. So you're telling me that we have close to 1 million people waiting for children, but we have
mhm,
115,000 children in foster care waiting for a safe family. So people don't really want to help
mm,
children. They want to own them and they want to adopt
mm,
them. And when you say, what are we supposed to do? Leave them on the street? Well, that's what they're choosing to do right now. They're
mhm,
choosing to wait on a waiting list for an
mhm.
infant instead of helping the children that need them right now.
Because it's about them. It's never about the child. It's
That's
about them.
Absolutely. And even with our adoption, right? Like I remember um how I learned how I got like chosen to be adopted. And it was like, they had all these like videos. And I remember on the videos were being sent to my parents in America. But I remember on the flip side in Sierra Leone, like I remember us kind of like being forced to like be all happy and all this kind of stuff, and just so
Mhm,
that we can appeal to these parents, right, or these
mhm,
potential
you were
prospective
selling yourself.
parents.
You're
And they
literally
were like,
selling yourself.
don't yell at each other or don't do this. And it's just like a lot of like make believe, a lot of faking, to put out a certain image. You know what I mean? So I understand that these parents are choosing, they might choose not to go with the 5-year-old because they're a little bit too old, or maybe this 5-year-old has a certain type of face or smile or whatever. They can just pick off of a
It's
gallery. And
sick.
that part is disturbing to me
It's
when I
absolutely
found that
sick.
out.
It's
Yeah, it is.
absolutely, and I wanted to touch on something. We talked about rebirthing. That thing, what you brought up, like a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, they might be different than what the parents want, right? Some
Mhm,
parents, especially in the early 2000s, they thought that they could rebirth children. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Candace Newmaker. She's a little 6-year-old in 2005
mhm.
that was unfortunately unalived. The therapy is now illegal. It became outlawed in 2008. Unfortunately, I went through the therapy in 2001.
What is
And
that? What is it? Can you explain for the audience or
yeah,
people who don't know?
so a lot, like you said, a lot of people want the experience of a newborn. And
Yeah.
sometimes
Mhm,
you don't get that. And you get an older
mhm.
child, 5, 6, 7, but that doesn't stop them from trying to get an experience with a newborn.
Weird.
So there is this birthing technique. It's called breath therapy. And what they do is they wrap you up in blankets, like a bunch of blankets, which resemble or supposed to resemble the placenta.
Mhm.
And trigger warning, y'all, it's about to get deep. They have your parents lay on your body and your therapist lay on your chest, and they purposely put their weight on your chest to make you feel constricted. While they're doing this, your therapist will say things like, your real mom didn't love you. Your real parents didn't love you. You have new parents. Don't you want to unalive your birth parents? Aren't you mad that they left you? So they rile you up, right? It's a terroristic tactic for
Being had is this
it's literally torture. It's categorized as torture, and they do this over and over and over until they break your psyche. Because as an older kid, I was at 7, 8 years old, be like, no, my real mom loved me. I just saw my siblings; they love me, right? And they break. And so what they do is they'll keep restricting the more you fight, and they get you upset because now, as a child, it's upsetting hearing those things, right?
Yeah.
So, no, my real. And so they do this, right? After months of this, and each session they wrap you up with another layer. So each session you go, it's getting tighter and
that
harder.
sounds like mummification or something.
And by the last session, this is why a lot of kids end up unaliving. If you hold out, they will suffocate you. It gets to the point where you cannot expand your lungs. So my last session, before I was born again, that's what they call it. It's really weird. It was like we were in it for like 3 or 4 months, and I was fighting. I was holding on. And then I remember that day, my therapist told me, she said, blow out as much air as you possibly can. So I listened to her, and then she wrapped me up. So I literally did not have any space in my lungs to expand my lungs for what. So from the very beginning of the session, I was already like, that's all I could breathe. It got to a point after they're exerting pressure, I passed out from suffocation, came to crying, thinking that like I had died. And then she's like, we're breaking through. And that's supposed to represent you going through the birth canal. Because a lot of kids, parents know this. There's a little second there that is very dangerous. That's why they say, like, when babies go through that birth, that's a very dangerous time, because they're coming out of your ovarian sac and into the world. And that's why it's so important. That's why the doctors are like making sure the babies can breathe. So because they know that for a split second, you cannot breathe. So they replicate that, and they're like, he's being born again. So I came out, and they're all like praising, like, yes, you accept. So like now I'm crying because I like thought I just died. And they're like, yes, you were born again. You accept your new parents, don't you?
People.
Excuse me, like, who the fuck approved this process?
It was legal.
Who sat in the office?
Catholic. I can tell you their name, Catholic Social Services. They're now known as Catholic Charities. They approved, and not only approved, they suggested this therapy. Oh, babes, it gets better. So I'm sitting there crying my eyes out. My therapist is praising me for being born again. My mom's crying. My dad's looking like, what the fuck? He never like really was with.
What is going? I didn't sign up for this shit. It's always the dads are always the moms are dragging them to all the crazy stuff. I swear to God.
So my therapist is like, you've been born again. And I was like, I love my parents. And I just, at that moment, I wanted my parents because I literally am afraid.
Yeah,
so
right.
if you're a child,
you just got freaking traumatized.
I want my mom. Like, I want my adoptive mom. So what do you do after your child comes out of the birth canal? What is the suggested thing? Number one thing to happen?
Skin to skin.
Yep, girl. They did it. I was 9 years old. And what happens after skin to skin? If you want to, as a parent,
it's not cutting the umbilical cord, is it?
No, there's no umbilical cord. What comes after skin to skin? How do you nourish your child?
Oh, like milking and stuff like that.
Stop. No, they did not. They did not.
9 years old in the therapy session, and that's the day my dad said he wasn't doing it no more. He stopped going after that. It suggested that you replicate birth from everything. Not only it did not stop there. Now, after that day,
like you had to suck on her titties. I'm sorry. I know that let's flip that out, but you had to.
To this day, you can ask my adoptive mother. She admits to everything. Like, I have a playlist on my TikTok of her admitting all of this. Now, our stories are exactly the same until we get to the titty sucking. She's like, oh, I gave you a bottle. No, you did not. I was 9 years old. Now, you gave me a bottle the next day because after that, I said I didn't want to do it. She tried it twice. The
For
second time, I was
milk?
like, yeah. She put her milk in a bottle. I know she did because I saw her. I saw her do it one day. She put her milk in a bottle and then fed it to me. And then I had to just drink it. So to me, that's still abuse.
Yes.
Abuse to the max. Like, I'm sorry, that's abuse. Like,
she will defend herself to this day and be like, well, that's just what they told me to do. I don't care if Jesus Christ himself came down and said, have your 9-year-old suckle on you. As a parent, I would be like, hold on. Coming in for what?
What was the dad saying about all this stuff when it was going on?
So I remember my dad being like, this is weird. I remember after that, they got into an argument and she goes, I'll just go by myself. And we started going after that. We didn't stop the sessions. The sessions continued, but now I didn't have to be like wrapped up anymore. Now it was like more regular talk therapy after that. And then if I ever declined, like if I ever was bad in school or bad at home, they would put me back into the placenta. So it was kind of like a don't do bad, otherwise you're going to get suffocated again. My dad
Karlos, your story, it's triggering a lot for me, and not in a bad way of like, I'm about to start bursting on tears, but it's bringing up a lot of memories of my childhood because I actually went through, not that extreme, but I went through an experience of my mom trying to connect with me, as if like on a maternal level. And sometimes these people would be desperate and do whatever, right? And so I remember my mom, we ended up going to this program, this like 3-day program of these parents who adopted kids and they're having a hard time connecting with them. So they come up with all these crazy things to do to reconnect with the kids. And I remember one of the exercises was for me to get on my mom's lap and to lay on her chest, like, and almost
pretend. You do know that was a rebirthing. They have these camps like that. We went to a rebirthing camp.
I didn't even know until we started talking about this because I'm like, did they do more extreme stuff? Because I didn't do any of that, but I did lay on her chest, like pretending like I was.
What happens is they invite all of these people, all these parents. They have a conference. And they have all of these weird trust things that you guys do where like your parents catch you or you do skin and
skin. Yes.
I'm telling
so how are you been through that?
What happened is they wrap you up in that and then they suggested you go do the therapy. Thank God that your parents didn't go do the therapy.
They didn't, oh my God, because that would have been wild. But I do remember being Karlos, I was so uncomfortable. I remember just being, I felt like shame and like, I just felt like disgusting about it. It's icky. It's just like, it's corny. It's icky. It's like what you're doing is not going to work. Let me just tell you that right now. Like, I'm sorry. We're not going to have that type of bond. And that's why me and Fatmata, our last video, we talked about this. You and your child are not going to be bonding in that way that you would with your biological child. Don't try to do all this crazy stuff to try to replicate that same type of feeling.
I also said earlier in the podcast with you today, that ain't your child. Your want to have a child, this is the result of that. That want is that's why that want, right? You want that. Go have that experience yourself. You cannot replicate that experience.
You cannot. I mean, God made it that way. I'm sorry if you're religious or Christian, whatever you are, God made it so that if you have your own child, you can bond with them eternally. If you don't have, that's why even fathers don't even bond with their kids the same way a mother would. So why do you think someone who is not even of the same blood?
I don't know if you guys have ever been on one of my lives, but people are taking this way too far. Well, one, it is not SA. And you know why it's not SA? When is the cutoff that you as a mother can choose not to breastfeed your child?
Like what age?
There is a cutoff.
Age you mean?
There's not a cutoff.
There's not really.
As long as you want.
Real.
I mean, the scientists say like 2 to 5, preferably. It also is cultural. Some cultures go older. There is no cutoff. So what is stopping a person from adopting a child at 6 or 7 years old and starting that process? And now we also have adoptive parents who are using a medication called domperidone, which is illegal to induce lactation here in the United States. They're inducing lactation. She was already naturally lactating because, like I told you, she had that baby, right? So she was already naturally lactating. There are people taking medicines and engaging suction on their areolas for months at a time and their nipples at a time to start that process. So they can do this to newborn babies, right? There are adoptive parents I've seen do the birth crawl. So the baby's born and womb wet. The adoptive mother rents a hospital room right next or in the same. I've seen one where the biological mom is in a hospital bed. The adoptive mom is in a hospital gown and hospital bed. They pull the baby out of the biological mother and place the baby on the stomach of the adoptive mother to try to replicate that breast crawl and try to replicate that attachment. Now, some kids might attach, but you have to force it because your areola secretes a liquid that the child, it's like pheromones. Like it's the body's amazing. The woman's body's amazing how they have children and their children can recognize their heartbeat, their scent. They're traumatizing infants for their own gain.
Yeah. And I always think about this. What's the end goal of it all, right? Because yes, there's the connection of mother to child, but at the end of the day, your child is going to leave the house at 18 years old if they're birthed.
Traumatized.
A lot of, no, I'm saying like just birth families, right? Like, let's say you birth a child, you raise up that child's going to leave at 18. They're going to start their own life anyways. You know what I'm saying? So what's the point of going through all of this so that you can, it makes me kind of think like you're kind of saying
it's selfishness.
It's like that ownership. It's like an ownership type of identity.
They just discovered that into the age of 25, parts of our, not our DNA, literally parts of children's DNA are in the mother's brain, right? And when you hug your mother, even after a long time of not seeing her, both of you guys get a release of, what is that called? That good feeling. Endorphins, right? There is a connection. There is a true connection that happens with birth mothers, right? And they're trying, and that's why they do it, because you can never replace a mother's love. Even if the mother was a shitty mother, even if the child knows that woman was a shitty mother, that child will always want to go back. And I tell adoptive parents this, your child will always want to go back. It's your job not to tell them no. It's your job to prepare them and to encourage if it's safe and possible and to help them along that journey. That is your job. So you can never take a child from their mother. It's in our DNA. It's how we survived as humans, right? For a millennia. That's how we survive. We need to know who we are. And we get that from our mother.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, as far as like adoption goes, it's like, especially people who are adopting kids who are older, like I was 8 years old when I was adopted, right? It's like, to me, it's like, instead of trying to replicate something that we know is impossible, you're not God. You can't create that. Why don't you put more focus and energy of learning how to build and bond with this child in a healthy way that is beneficial for not only you, but also for the child as well?
Because it goes back to, it's not about the child. It's pure selfishness. It's all about them. It's all about what they want. The child is second in all of this. It's literally all about them. That's the only, a lot of them, that's the only purpose of this.
And it's ownership, like even in your scenario, like I tell people, like this is why I tell adoptive parents, these aren't your kids. Love them like they're your kids, treat them like they're your kids. But no, these aren't your kids. They're not going to have the same interests as you all the time. You're not going to see little quirky little things that they do that remind you of you or your mom, because they're not biologically your kids. Now, what you may see if you know their families, that reminds me of your sibling, or that reminds me of your mom when I was with her, right? Like I have this thing where I bite my tongue, and my mom hated that because my father bit his tongue, like when he's like thinking or frustrated, and she was like, "Stop biting your tongue," because that reminded her of where I really came from, right? And I think that's why, to answer your question, is it goes back to ownership. You should be so grateful, Hawa, that you were taken at 8 years old. You could have been left eating dirt chips, like, right? Like, because these are the things that people say
all the time. When we started our podcast, like that's what like every person was saying. You guys are so ungrateful. You should be grateful. They brought you into their house. They gave you a great life.
Especially when you're international adoptee. Oh, they ramp up the gratefulness. They ramp it up. Like international adoptees, I feel so bad for y'all, because I was like, the way that they be coming after y'all, talk about, would you rather be eating dirt chips? I was like, what?
Exactly. Because starving and all this craziness, and it's like, this is why we have this podcast and we have people on here to show that we're not the only ones having these experiences back to back. And it's not like we go after people who've had traumatic experiences. We don't target y'all. So it's like, we don't go out and target these guests like specifically. Oh, we want the person who's been through the most hurt, the most pain. No, it's just something that is very, very common. You know what I'm saying? It just happens, and like we're not the only ones with these type of stories. Like, and Karlos is not. He's his. I mean, you've gone through a hell of a lot, but your story is as unique as it is. For every single person that's gone through something like what you have, there's 10 other people that have too. You know what I'm saying?
And that's why I speak. I speak because I want more people, just like even in your reaction now, you're like, wait, hold on. I too might have been through rebirthing. I'm like, girl, you was.
Yeah.
You
No.
did. But it takes people like me talking about it and explaining it. So like, even sometimes with the way that the brain works, the brain is trying to protect you. So your brain might not even put that together. It might be like, and then you might have to unpack and be like, oh, hold on. So I think that's why it's important for every adoptee experience, good, bad, or indifferent, to be shared, because there's learning through all dialogue, right?
Absolutely.
There's learning through all experiences. And one thing that I hate, that I try not to do, is trauma compare, because my trauma is not more valid to anybody else's trauma, but we definitely can find commonality in our experiences. And at the end of the day, if you're doing this work, it is not to say who has the worst trauma. It is, hey, let's collectively all look at all of our trauma and say, all right, this happened to all of us. How can we make this better? Right?
Exactly. So taking it back to your family, to your parents, and that whole them just moving when you were out of town. And I remember watching one of your TikToks, and it was like you were saying that your adoptive mom was saying once she had her own child, she was saying to you like, oh, well, I have my child to take care of now. Like, you're not really important anymore. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, like I said, my mother struggled with infertility, my adopted mother. And people, when I do these interviews, they always say, like, why do you call her mother? I do that specifically. Her name is Debbie. Hey, Debbie. I know she be listening. She gonna be listening. She literally does. She listens to everything I do. For a woman who wanted to abandon her child, she does. She sure does keep up with me. I call her my mother because she's legally my mother. Her name is on my birth certificate. Until that day, until her name comes off that birth certificate and is replaced with my true mother, she will be held accountable as being my mother. She, at that moment, okay, so she had her first baby. There were several, I would say 5 to 7 miscarriages in between. And these aren't like first trimesters. These are late second, early third. And we're Catholic, so we believe that life begins at conception. I'm not Catholic no more. I was growing up. Which means that we had to have a funeral for like each time she lost a child. So that's why I distinctly remember it, because we were having like these funerals and like these homegoings for these babies. And then she got pregnant with she got pregnant, but I didn't know she was pregnant. And it makes sense now. I spoke to my adopted brother actually 2 weeks ago. This is the first time I've seen him in 15 years. He cut contact with him as well for about 10 years. He just reconnected with our dad, which is his dad, but he says he does not fuck with Debbie, our adopted mom. She's a horrible person. But he let me know things that I didn't know, because like he was still in the home. So when they sent me to the Troubled Teen Institution in Wyoming when I was 13, she was already pregnant. I didn't know that. That was the reason I was sent there. I just thought, like, it was so random. I was really doing good in school. I felt like we were not connecting like she wanted to, but it wasn't as bad as it had been. Like, I felt like for me, it was like things were getting better. I was liking middle school. I was finding my place with my classmates. And then randomly I got kidnapped from my house and put on this camp in Wyoming for 2 years. I came home and she had a baby. Like, she had a toddler. He wasn't even a baby. She had a toddler. And she's like, oh, here, this is your brother, Dominic. And I was like, when did you have and mind you, I've been on phone calls with her. She sent me letters over the never did she let me know that there was another baby.
Wow.
My brother, Chris, told me that she did that on purpose because she thought that I was the reason for her miscarriages. And she gave herself a false conclusion, because when she put me in the camp, she had a full pregnancy. So she connected that, like, it could have just been happenstance, right? But she connected that with me.
Oh my God.
What an awful thing to say to a child.
So fast forward, when she said, I don't need you. When I got kicked out, she was 8 months pregnant. when they left. So this is now a pattern of behavior of her sending her child away. At this moment, they didn't have another $100,000 to send me to a camp. So they just left me on the street. So it wasn't just random. She said that. And I remember like a week before she left me, she goes, I have my own children to worry about now. I cannot worry about you. And she was visibly
She said that to you?
Mhm. And at this moment, I was working 2 part-time jobs, like I told you. She had me buying my own food. I had my own cell phone. I had to pay electricity, otherwise they would turn the electricity. Like I was pretty much already, and I had asked them for an emancipation.
Like you were pretty much acting as like an adult at this
I
point.
had asked them for an emancipation. They wouldn't give me an emancipation. And I later learned why through my brother Chris. They didn't want to lose that stipend. So there was a $2,500 stipend that they got for me until I was 21. If they would have allowed me to emancipate myself, that stipend would have gone to me or like a guarantor or somebody to make sure that like I was going to be okay with the stipend. They didn't want to lose that stipend. And that was the main reason why they abandoned me. They continued to keep that stipend until I was 19. I figured out because I was homeless. I was homeless again at 19. So I had went through all of that with my life coaches, that other, got my own apartment, and I didn't want to rely on him. So when I met my husband at 19, we were 19. My husband was 21 at the time. We were just boyfriends. We like made some bad financial decisions. We find ourselves homeless, right? I went to the state and I said, hey, I'm homeless and I know my parents get $2,500 a month. Can I get some of that so I can get a house? And the state was like, wait, hold on. You haven't seen, I was like, I haven't seen them in like 4 years. They're like, oh, okay. And I was like, so y'all gonna send it? And they're like, no, we're gonna cut it off, but we're not sending it to you. And I said, well, damn.
Who paid you all those years, like track back, paid you all those 5 years that they were doing.
Well, what they said was because your adoption contract for the stipends is between your parents and us in the state, not you. We don't owe you anything. Now they say you can go ask your parents for the money if you want.
Which I doubt
they
would know
where they were. I didn't even know where they were. I still don't know where they are. I've only spoken to her on the phone over the last like 10 years, twice over the phone. Never seen her again face to face since then.
So, the fuck? Oh my! I'm just so
I don't even know what question
mind boggled
at this point, because this actually happens.
So did she? You said you've had conversations with her.
There's a whole playlist.
What did she? I'm gonna have to go and watch it.
Yeah.
What was her thinking? What did she?
So I had a conversation with her. It had to be about 4 years ago when I started this whole advocacy thing. Like, because honestly, after I got out of college, I wanted to leave all of this shit behind me. Like, I had my husband, like I had my degree. I was like, we're good. I got into my acting career. I was doing great. I was living in Seattle. I really left. I found my family. I found my birth family. We had reunited. It was rough in the beginning, but like it was smooth sailing. Like things were coming up. I get a call from my agent one day and was like, hey, there's some random woman saying that she saw you on a Target commercial and saying that's your mom. And I was like, what's her name? And they're like, Debbie. I was like, it's her. So what?
Oh, damn it. She found me.
So I was like, you can get my phone number. So that's when we started to recommunicate. The first thing that she told me was she was proud of me, how well spoken you are. You look great, this, that, and the other. And honestly, even going through all that trauma, a little part of me was like, I had reserved hope that like, if I just did, that's why honestly, I look back at it now. That's why I became so successful. It's partially because I wanted to be successful, but partially I wanted them to look back and be like, wow, like he really did it by himself.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm so proud of you, this, that, and the other. And I started telling her, I was like, yeah, I'm with my boyfriend. She's like, your boyfriend? Because at the time we still weren't married. And she's like, okay. And I was trying to go back to college. And she's like, oh, we'll support you going back to college. We're so proud of you. Our next conversation, I was in therapy at that point. And I said, hey, moving forward, I was hesitant. I was really hesitant. I said, hey, I think we need to unpack this with a therapist. Like, this is too much for us to do by ourselves. Like, I haven't talked to you in 10 years.
Yeah.
Like, we need somebody. Because she wanted to just hop right back in. Like, she would call like, hey, Karlos, how you doing? And I was like, no. You do not get to be a happy.
Are you kidding me? She left you. Disappeared, a child, and then she comes back like nothing happened.
Like nothing happened. And my trauma got triggered because I was like, you're not going to be used again. So I said, hey, I think that we should work through this with a therapist. And she goes, okay. And she goes, find one and we'll work it out. So I found a therapist and she goes, oh, that's out of our network for our insurance. So you'll have to cover it. And I said, do you want me to pay for therapy that you caused? And I'm still like, at that moment, like we weren't struggling, but like, I'm still in my early 20s. Like I'm still getting on my feet. Like, if you want this relationship. So she goes, no. Well, she goes, well, you know what? Here's the deal. This is what your father and I decided. This is her exact words. Your father and I will help you pay for your college and we will pay for the therapy, but you have to do something for us. And I said,
Debbie needs to be locked up. Debbie, if you watching this, you need to be locked up.
So she says, you have to do something for me. And I said, well, what do I have to do? And she goes, you're going to have to go to conversion therapy and you're going to have to you're going to have to get rebaptized and you're going to have to identify Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Now, mind you, at this moment, I'm 25, 24. I've been with my husband since 19. So that's a good 5-6 years. She wanted me to leave my partner, become straight, go into the seminary, and become a priest to get help from them. As you can see, I said you can suck it where the sun doesn't shine.
Exactly.
So
that's what you said. I'm surprised. I would have.
So I was like, absolutely not. So then we didn't contact each other for a couple years. I write my first book. She once again contacts my agent. I say, give her my number. And then that's where the audio comes from on the page. Because this time I was smart. I said, the first time you got me, this time I'm going to record it. And I was in a one-party recording state, which she hates because he recorded me illegally. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. One party consent state. I don't need to tell you that I'm recording. She told everything. She told everything. She like literally told on herself. Because what I did was, I do what I do now when I'm talking to adoptive parents. I made her feel like she was the victim in all of this. And I was like, yo, how did the state leave you with this child that was so hard? Like, it must have been so hard for you raising all of these kids. And she's just then she just started divulging information. Oh, I didn't beat you. I just locked you in a closet. I never beat you. I just slapped you over your face a bunch of times. Get over it. And go listen to it. These are her words. And I was like, so you're admitting to locking me in closets and beating me and starving me. Get over it. I said, okay. And I asked her, I said, so how do you feel now? And she goes, Karlos, you're barking up the wrong tree. She goes, you shouldn't be asking me how I feel. You should be asking yourself how you feel, and you should be forgiving yourself. And I said, forgive myself for what? And she goes, for not accepting our family. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
It's dark. So then after that conversation, you'll see her pop up in my TikTok lives. She'll be on my page. She still posts on her Facebook. One of her last posts that I saw was she, now because of my advocacy, she believes that children like myself should never be adopted. She posted on one of her pages, she says, children should never be adopted. Children who come from trauma, who have no chance of reunification, should be placed into some type of internment camp or facility where they stay into the age of 21. After they're 21, they should be reassessed and let out to the public or kept forever if they have not healed from their trauma. She literally thinks that adoptees and foster youth should be institutionalized our entire lives. That's where she stands. I spoke to my step adopted brother last week. His wife was like, that bitch is not invited to our house ever, because he's been telling her the stories. And it was really hard for me, because it was really hard for me to not connect him to his parents. Because to me, those are, even though that's his stepmom, you were still there, you were still part of it. But he never traumatized me. I never had a problem with my brother. We were always been really close. But for me, I had to really make sure that I was mentally okay and emotionally okay to restart that relationship with him, because I look at you and I see my dad. and I just automatically remember all of the things that I've been through. But he now has a baby, and he wanted me to meet his daughter and say, like, you have a niece, and you know, he says, like, you're my brother for regardless for the rest of our lives. And I just think that's also kind of unfair that, like, we are placed into these legal agreements with other children, and now we have to navigate those relationships even without our parents there, you know. And ultimately, I just want them off my birth certificate. I don't want to be adopted no more. Like, I'll still love my brother, like, cool, I'll still be an uncle, but we don't need to be legally related anymore. And that's my goal. Like, if anything in my life that I want to accomplish before I close my eyes for the final time on this planet is my birth mother who gave birth to me, rather good, bad, or indifferent, and my birth father, they need to be on my birth certificate. Not only for my sanity and my healing, but also for my future generations. You know, that just needs to happen.
It is so amazing and empowering hearing your story and how you went from all of these insanely, disgustingly tragic things, and you rose above that. And now you turn it around and you heal yourself. You're like, I'm going to do something good with this. And you're just flourishing. I don't know how you did it. Like, the trauma that I have been through was not as close to what you've been through. And I'm still still trying to heal from that. I don't know how you went through all of that and you still decided to rise above all of it.
Healing is not so linear.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Healing is not linear.
No.
Definitely have not healed completely. I definitely will struggle with this for the rest of my life. And like I said, this is why I don't compare people's trauma, because your trauma, the same way you're getting through it, it's the same way I'm getting through it. We wake up, we do our hair, we put our pants on one foot at a time, and we show our best face. There's no secret sauce.
No.
You're doing it already, right? That's why we can't compare, and we should never compare, because every human being has a struggle, right? And you can, instead of comparing, you can say, hey, listen, this person had it rougher. That doesn't mean that you can't have a bad day. Because I feel like some days I will be like, oh man, I gotta be strong because other people had it rough. No, bitch, I can be sad today and I can be weak today. I'm sad and I don't care who's strong. I don't want to be strong today, right? So let's not use my story of strength as being like, oh, I just happened to do it because I knew, like I said earlier in conversation, it's genetic. I come from a long history of strong people. And two, the best revenge is your paper. Beyonce said that. And the second one is being successful, shining light, right? For me right now, my biggest get back to them is being mentally and financially able to give my niece care. I can end that cycle for another child happening. For me, that was all worth it. All of this. And one thing I've learned through therapy and with my life coaches, life is a journey and it's a gift, which is why it's called a present. That's why the present is called the present. It's a present, it's a gift. We can't look back. We can't look back. There's a phrase called Sankofa from the Ghana people, and it means to look back so your future is better and brighter, right? So a lot of us, when we want to go through trauma, we want to look forward. We want to keep looking forward. But history always repeats itself. And for you to stop history repeating itself, you got to look back. You got to turn your head back like the Sankofa bird and look back at where you came from, not only where you came from in your life, but also where your ancestors came from, right? We are our ancestors' greatest victory. And no matter what I went through, if we really want to compare, they were enslaved.
Yeah.
Right? If we're gonna compare stuff, babe, like, imagine that trauma, and they had to pick themselves up and make some. They didn't go through that for me to sit here and do nothing.
Right.
They didn't survive for me to do nothing. I had to get up, and that's why I get up every single day, and I try to make today better than yesterday. But also, you know, the future is not guaranteed. We're going to have bad days. We're going to have good days. I still struggle with mental health. I do it really cute. Y'all may, and that's another thing. Don't be believing what y'all see on these TikTok pages. Girl, I be crying curled up and I'll be crying curled up in a fetal position and be like, hey, like Shiner.
I totally get it. Totally get it.
You will never see me cry. You would never see me at my bottom, but I do get there. I do get there. And I'm blessed to have an amazing husband, an amazing birth family, amazing platform that does support me, you know. So yeah, that's how I do it. That's how I do it, just like you. Every single day, I just get up and I put my best face forward.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming onto our podcast. And now, before we end, I know you said you do kinship. Is there any other projects that you do that's other than the books that you've written that you are currently participating in or do?
Absolutely. Well, we just wrapped up the Black Mothers March. If you guys get the opportunity, they go every year on Mother's Day to march on Washington to raise awareness of CPS, family policing. We were just there last weekend. They're hosting one next year. So I will be getting ready for that. As you guys know, it takes like a whole year to get things. Once you get done with the event, you got to plan for the next year. After that, I have a lot of speaking engagements coming throughout the year. I'll let you guys know on my platform. I think most of them were this month. It's Foster Care Awareness Month. So most of them were this month or going to be already happening. But in the near future, we have the book coming out, the pre-sale, Abort the Adoption. That's the name of my second book, Word of the State, Abort the Adoption. It's on pre-sale. It is coming out January 1st, 2025. And then I also have a documentary in the works. I'm so excited for that. We're trying to get it picked up. Netflix.
They need to get on that.
Well, honestly, because we have the director already. We already have the funding. I don't want to make I don't half-ass things. So if I'm going to do something, I want to put my name on it. I want it to be official. And with Netflix, with all of these stories, like we had Natalia Grace, we had Hell Camp with the troubled teen institutions. We have the Paris Hilton documentary. We have the one, like all of these documentaries about things that are literally my life. I want to create a documentary about the lived experience of foster youth, and I want to and adoptees who are going through all of these things that we spoke about, and really show, because we really don't get the light that we need. So we're working on that, and then other than that, y'all, I'm taking a break. I'm now a kinship parent, so I usually have more things going on, but I'm taking a step back from a lot of advocacy. And a lot of things on the advocacy realm, because I have a child that needs a lot of my attention in my home now. But I'm not going nowhere forever. It'll just be into, she gets into her groove, but I wanted to be attentive to her while she's here. But until then, I'll just keep doing these podcasts and interviews, just to let people know that they're not alone and their story is valid. But if you want to keep up with me, you can definitely follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Ward of the State 1.0. And then my calendar on my website, which is just karlosdillard.com.
Wow.
Now, Karlos, before we leave, I feel like because you've lived so many different experiences, you've learned to come out on the other side. Like, for people who are going through really challenging and tough times, who are maybe in foster system or adopted, and they're going through such abuse, or they don't have a person that's on their corner, what kind of advice would you give to them, whether that be for the emotional standpoint or actual physical things that they can do to have more safety in their life? What kind of advice would you give to them?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Two things. Number one, financial literacy. No matter how much trauma that you go through, the world does not give a fuck. Bills need to be paid. You cannot say, oh, I'm having a rough time. You will be homeless. So I always say, unfortunately, capitalism doesn't give a fuck about trauma, babe.
Right.
It's true.
It's so true. Number one is financial literacy. If you're a foster youth or an adoptee, we don't have a whole lot of safety nets. You might have an adoptive parent that supports you, you might not. You might have a birth family that supports you, might not, right? Support yourself. Part of supporting yourself is having safety nets for yourself. Have a rainy day funds. Understand how to live in a capitalistic society. You can't beat them, join them. That's what I say. Now, I'm not saying be out here hurting people in capitalism, but you are already a marginalized identity and you are already a statistic. So once again, that's my step 2. So after you learn financial literacy, you set up a good credit score for yourself. You set up whatever that might look like. That might look like investments, real estate, businesses, whatever it might look like for you personally. Make sure you have a financial safety net for yourself, because it's not if you're going to fail or fall sometimes, it's when. And if you have that safety net there to catch you. We all fall sometimes, right? We all make bad decisions. We all make mistakes. And sometimes we fall. And a lot of us have parents and families to catch us. As adoptees and foster youth, a lot of times we don't. So you're going to have to be your own safety net. And part of that is have that credit score. So if you have a mental breakdown and you can't work, you have a rainy day fund and you got an Amex card that got a unlimited amount. Okay. And then make sure you pay that at least the minimum. You should be paying more than that. Keep your cards under 30%, please. Some little financial literacy there. Second thing is, it goes back to Sankofa. One of the biggest things that I would say to a person with my lived experience is to look back at history, look back at what has happened. The statistics are there. So how I tell people how to survive, use the knowledge that's already in front of you. If you don't want to become a statistic, that's the playbook right there. No one's handing us a playbook of how to do it, but we sure do have a playbook of how not to do it, because we have statistics of children being, like I said, having babies at a young age. 50% of foster youth or homeless are foster youth. 50% of people who are in the criminal system have been in the foster care system. So look back at the statistics and say, hey, if I can keep myself, from being pregnant young as a person, whether you're a woman or being a father early, because dads also have a responsibility there. 2, make sure that, okay, I know that 75% of people who struggle in child welfare have mental health issues. Make sure you have your therapy. Look back at all of the statistics. And instead of trying to not become a statistic, just look at the statistics and do the opposite. That's what I did. I looked at it. I was like, oh, so 75% of kids don't get a high school diploma. So if I don't want to end up in this cycle of statistics, I need to get a high school diploma or GED equivalency. And then, right? So look at it, because the numbers are there. Like I'm a numbers person, and numbers are there. Look at what has happened statistically, and then do the opposite, because they don't give us a playbook of how to succeed, but they do unfortunately give us a playbook of those who have failed. So look at the people who have failed before you and try not to replicate that system or that process.
And that is A1 recommendation and advice, because you can use that advice and replicate it in all different areas of your life. Me and Fatmata, I know we always talk, a lot of times we get in conversations about like, where Black people are at as far as like society, the power we have, and opportunities that we have. And it's like, on the one hand, we can play victim and say, well, because we're Black, we're not able to get all these opportunities and da 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 da. But then if you take your advice, Karlos, of look at the statistics, look at what has been done in history, right? This percentage of Black people, maybe they don't go to this type of college or whatever, right? So, or they don't even get college degree, or they don't take it upon themselves to take these type of opportunities. Being able to do the opposite of it, and betting on yourself and seeing, okay, when I actually do these things that are not common, what's going to happen on the other side? You know what I'm saying? So I feel like that's amazing. Amazing advice.
Yeah. And honestly, if you do that and that compare it with financial literacy, you'll be set. I tell people all the time, like, you really will be set. And you can make your life whatever it looks like. It really is up to you. And like, I love that you guys brought that up, because I see people say that all the time. And I do understand systemic oppression and redlining and all of it, Black women, birth rate issues, all of it. But at the end of the day, we can sit here and be like, oh, woe is me, like you said, or we can look back and say, okay, what can we do to not be that statistic?
Exactly.
And what can we do to prevent?
And it's going to be there. All those disparities are going to be there. But I think a lot of times it's betting on yourself and not giving up on yourself, and being able to put in the work and not just stop at, well, this is my norm, this is what I've known, and even for adoption, right? It's like, you can't just stop at like, well, all I know is, everyone else has a family and they're taken care of and I don't. And so woe is me. And it's like, no, you have to do the work for yourself. You have been given a different path. And so you have to learn how to work that path.
Absolutely. And also stop, y'all. This is my last message to you. Stop comparing yourselves, because even the people that got families, they got families that make them feel horrible. They're not invited to the dinners. Then the mama always got something slick to say. Like, just because people got things you don't have doesn't mean that it's better than what you have or lack. Okay.
That's so true. That is so true. That's a perfect way to close this out. That is so true.
Yeah.
Carlos, we just thank you so much for coming on here and telling your story. It's been crazy, emotional up and downs, and listening to your story. It's amazing. You guys, please like buy his books. Go follow him on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We have a YouTube, right? Yeah, YouTube. Follow him because he is doing amazing things for the foster youth and just adoptees in general. So don't forget to, after you're done watching this video, go follow him, and don't forget to subscribe, share the story, and just be part of our journey as we bring on more adoptees to tell their stories. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.